Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this episode, we'll look at Florida's loss to Alabama, in which the Gators were just 2 points short. Slow start, too much to overcome despite a big finish. Which players made a good impression yesterday, and expectations for the rest of the 2021 season. Will, we're going to dive into it, but you were at the game yesterday, man. How'd you enjoy it?
Oh man, I'm not sure that you can have a better time than the only way it could have been better, obviously, is if Florida had pulled it out. But it was an awesome time. Harmonic Woods tailgate beforehand, and then our friend Alan Levine, he invited me up to his seat, so my brother and I got to hang out with him. So that was great. And the reality is, there's no place like home. There's no place like the swamp. And it's fun to see old friends and make new ones. And my family lives in town too. So Florida Gator football is always a family thing for us. So anytime I can get down there, it's always sort of a revisit to all the different times I've been able to come down there. So it's sort of a schmaltzy time for me, as well as work and watching the games and trying to help people figure out exactly what happened. But a blast, man, just a blast.
Well, first major game in the swamp since we had the shutdown and everything, and it was alive today. We're going to dive into two bits right here. Dan Mullen thanked the fans after the game, called it an awesome environment, said it was unbelievable atmosphere. The fans certainly did their part. The margin of error in this game is small, and Gator Nation definitely showed up today. Will, the margin of error is very small. Let's start right there with that comment. We're there. We're close. We're competitive with the top echelon of this sport in Alabama. You can make an argument that this Alabama team might be a big underdog against last year's Alabama team, but the fact is they're still the standard in college football, and we went toe-to-toe with them for 60 minutes.
Well, I mean, we went toe-to-toe with them for 45 minutes. The first 15 didn't look anything like we were going toe-to-toe with them. So, and that's really the difference in the game, right? I mean, Alabama converted on all the opportunities they had early on. Obviously, there were some penalties that people take exception to. But I think if you go back and rewatch it, there were some things that went Florida's way too when it came to the Zebras a little bit. And the reality is you can't make excuses. Michael Jordan got all the calls, right? Nobody gave Mark Price a call when Michael Jordan was out there playing. Nobody certainly gave any of the Utah Jazz or Brian Russell any of the calls when he was out there with Jordan. And that's sort of what you're dealing with when you're dealing with Alabama. Is it's the team that everybody expects is going to come through, and so you're going to have to overcome some of those things to take them down. I thought Florida played real well. I mean, obviously, you look at it and say, was it a clean game? Not really. I mean, Florida, I think, can play better. I think that's maybe the encouraging thing coming out of it. And, everybody, I think there's sort of a divide amongst people who say, well, we don't want to have moral victories. We want to finally win one. And I completely sympathize with that side. But there's also the side that says, well, we're getting closer and closer and closer, and eventually we're going to break through. And I sympathize with that side too, because Florida has another gear. They can play better than they played yesterday, and like you said, they still were able to come storming back and make it a close one. And if they get that 2-point conversion, it's a very different story today. If that game goes to overtime, who knows what happens? And even if Florida doesn't come out on top on overtime, it's a different story if you push it all the way to overtime.
This is Florida Gator football. You're not happy to lose games. It's not something where you're pleased with just hanging in there type of thing. Even Dan Mullen himself says we give up too many first downs on penalties. We allowed Alabama to keep their drives alive at key times. Hey, there were timeouts. If you go back and track our timeout usage, we had 2 timeouts at the end of the game. Our timeout was blown on that 4th and goal play where Alabama originally lined up. We didn't have a guy at the top of the field covering the running back who was at the top. I mean, it was in the first quarter. Don't even get me started on the first quarter timeout usage. Each one of those were to prevent a mistake of some kind. So there was missed assignments all over the place yesterday. But Mullen said it well after the game. He pointed all that out, but he also said he likes the attitude and effort of this team. These guys, they're not intimidated by the elephant, all right? If they show up in Atlanta and get the opportunity to play Alabama again, which we don't have to talk about just yet. We still got to get through Georgia. We still got to play this season out, and we have no room for error at this point for sure. But I do like the fact that we are competing head up against a team that has been the standard of the sport for the last decade, trying to reclaim that spot ourselves because we've been to the top of that mountain before.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see, right? I think I'm gonna be much more impressed with Florida's attitude if they come out and just absolutely pancake Tennessee. Go run for 400 yards, go win 45-10, and then I say, yeah, now you're legitimate, right? Because you've taken on the elephant. That's all well and good, but last year we saw it, right? Obviously, the Alabama team, what the Alabama game was after the LSU game, but it's the LSU game that sticks for me from last year in terms of the disappointment. The Alabama game, I think you look at and say, okay, that was a measuring stick. We came up short. We kind of expect to come up short because our players, we're not quite as talented. Mullen even sort of alluded to needing to increase the talent level on the team in the post-game press conference yesterday. So, you're not going to win every game against Alabama. You're especially not going to win if you keep fronting Alabama 18 points. They've given them an 18-point lead, or at least not given them, but they have fallen behind by 18 points in the last two games they've played Alabama. That's kind of become a theme. They fell behind by 14 to Georgia. Year before Georgia, they fell behind quite a bit. So that seems to be a trend. Need to sort of fix that one. But again, I think you can walk out of this encouraged, but the encouragement only matters if you go out and start taking care of business against teams you're supposed to take care of business with the same way Alabama does, right? So Alabama plays a tough game against Florida, is able to pull it out, but nobody expects they're going to go out and have another tough game the next couple of weeks when they're playing sort of the middle road of the SEC. That, I think, is the thing that will impress me, is if Florida comes out and does that against the Tennessees and Kentuckys and Missouris of the world. And then obviously you got the big looming Halloween special coming up with Georgia in a couple of months. And, hopefully at that point we'll have a really good idea of where this team is.
Let's talk about some of the major differences in the game here. I'm obviously the first one every Gator fan will point to is the fact that Anthony Richardson was not able to play. Obviously, the man's doing backflips on the field, so he's not terribly injured, but hamstrings, we talked about it all week. If you go listen to our podcast, our preview show, hamstrings are a fickle thing. And you even brought it up last week, Will. You said it might not be the thing we want to hear or want to see, but it might be better off to just sit Richardson in this game to make sure you have him for the stretch, for the schedule down the stretch here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to defer to Mullen and the medical experts. I have no idea what condition he was actually in. Obviously, you see him do a backflip, and then you see the offense sort of sputter in the first quarter, and that's being second guessed quite a bit, I'm sure, by everybody in the stands. At the same time, it's a long season, and Mullen's faith in Emory Jones, I think, was really rewarded in this one, right? I mean, I thought Jones played pretty well. His interception came on a ball where he was hit, the ball sailed a little bit. So I think the team acquitted itself quite well, but obviously, missing a guy who's putting up explosive plays like Richardson is on a consistent basis is a big deal, especially in a game where it ends up being 2 points, and in a game where Florida really kind of struggled to score, even when they got explosive plays, especially in the first half. They had some explosive plays. They didn't convert into touchdowns, definitely, but certainly not always into points either.
Well, we're obligated by law to mention Anthony Richardson first when you talk about quarterbacks. But Emory Jones, how did you feel? You mentioned the one mistake he made on the day with the overthrow. There's certainly some other ones there, but there wasn't the big major errors that we saw in weeks 1 and 2 against FAU and USF. He did seem to settle down a little bit. There seemed to be a stretch of the game where he was playing with a lot of confidence. I mean, I sit there and think that throw he made to Trent Whittemore on 3rd and 19 on a critical final drive, he ran that option play very well. Certainly some miscommunications at times. We had to blow a timeout on a 4th down. We had to blow a timeout on 4th down on the first drive. When we settled for the field goal, we ended up blowing a 4th down on a later drive to a timeout on a 4th down on a later drive as well. So it seems to be those little issues like that are still popping up, but very effective in the running game. And between Jones and those running backs, Florida really controlled everything on the ground yesterday.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jones was. I mean, if nothing else, I think you have to be impressed with his toughness. Right, 19 runs for 77 yards. He got hit a lot. He got hit on a bunch of his throws, especially in the first half as well. And so, to keep coming back, to keep getting up, to keep forcing things down the field, to come to a place where when they didn't convert the 4th down, people were booing him, which I think is unfortunate because, I mean, obviously the guy's given a lot of himself to the university, whether he's playing well or not. But that fourth down play near midfield where they weren't able to get the conversion, it sort of felt like that was kind of the end of the game at that point. You kind of thought that Alabama was going to drive right back down the field after that, and that would be it. But to be able to pick himself up from that, get it to 21-9. They had it to midfield with like 3 or 4 minutes left, and that was another one. I'll have something up on YouTube later this week that looks at a specific play in that drive where I think he had the opportunity to let one fly, and he did. And I think that's sort of the next level for Emory Jones, is he's going to have to start letting it go down the field a little bit more. There were a couple. There was the pass interference on Jacob Copeland that set up a touchdown. There was also the back shoulder throw to Xavier Henderson that I thought was really nice.
Great throw.
But beyond that, Florida was not stretching the ball down the field at all. Mm-hmm. You could feel Alabama creeping up, and you kind of kept waiting for them to take a deep shot, and they just never really did. And part of that is I think they were moving the ball so well on the ground that Mullen didn't want to waste it down taking a deep shot and then not be able to convert the first down. At the same time, you're going to have to start stretching the defense. So a lot of good for Emory Jones, but I think there's certainly some things that you can look at and say there's some definite areas that need some work.
Were you surprised at his performance based on the first 2 games?
No, I mean, I think the one thing that you've definitely noticed is they put in some easier reads for him, especially on third down. All of the throws to the tight end that were third down conversions were things where they were running actions that made it look like they were going to throw either a quick screen to a wide receiver, or they were going to run something that they had sort of shown against FAU or USF. And then they just sort of slipped the tight end out, and it gave him a nice, easy short throw for a first down. And I think they hit Gamble and then Zipper on a couple of those that ended up being explosive plays. And so that, I think, was the adjustment that Florida really made in the passing game, was try to sort of limit he was not making, until the last drive, he was not making multi-read. There wasn't stuff where he was starting on the left-hand side of the defense and going all the way back to the other side that often. It was much more of a 1 read, 2 read, and then go run. You saw that a bunch, right? Where he would sort of get caught. It'd be like a 3 or 4 yard gain. You could tell that he had sort of been coached. Hey, if it's not there in the first one, just get out of there. And, let's live to fight another day. But again, I think that's an impressive thing, right? For a quarterback to be able to say, I'm willing to do that, right? That I'm willing to take the 4 yards and come back 2nd and 6. And, we'll hand it off to Malik Davis. There were a lot of 4th downs in this one. Like Florida, even on some of their touchdown drives, had to have 4th down conversions to get it in the end zone. That's going to be a function of a team that really isn't as explosive with Emory Jones at quarterback, certainly as they were with Kyle Trask last year, or as they have been with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. That was sort of the thing that you felt when you were in the stadium, is it just didn't really feel until until it started to tighten up there in the 4th quarter. It didn't feel like Florida could move the ball at will. Even though they had more yards, even though they were, from an offensive perspective, they were moving the ball better than Alabama. When you look at the game at an overall, as at a whole, it didn't feel like you were like, it felt like when Alabama had the ball, you were kind of waiting for the dam to break. It didn't feel like that when Florida had the ball. You kind of felt like Alabama was going to be able to stop them at, 6 yards, 8 yards, 9 yards a pop. And then eventually they were able to start getting larger plays there in the second half.
We'll get into the defensive issues during 4 bits, but to finish out 2 bits here, I made a note when I went back and watched the game today. I made a note that said Florida killed Florida's momentum on a lot of occasions, and in particular, I'm going to go back to that drive where Rick Wells, they start off with a big pass to Wells where he beats the linebacker inside, gets a bunch of yak, gets to the midfield point. Great start to a drive. Jones is looking confident in the passing game. But on the next play, you got Pierce on an end around, and Wells just grabs the jersey, like fully grabs the jersey of Armour Davis. Officials call a holding, pushes it back to 2nd and 19. Next play, screen pass to Gamble, gets blown up in the backfield, 3rd and 23, and the Gators just run the ball to basically avoid the big mistake, kills the momentum of the drive. And I felt like there were enough of those examples throughout the day that if you want to talk about a major difference in the game, you want to beat the number 1 team in the country. I mean, how many teams could shoot themselves in the foot this many times and still play within 2 points of the number 1 team in the country?
I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, I thought it was almost a dereliction of duty that Saban didn't call a timeout there to get the ball back with like a minute and 40 seconds or a minute and 30 seconds
right before halftime.
right before halftime. It's the same drive you're talking about, right? I mean, there was a minute 30 left. Florida runs the ball on 3rd and 19. Saban doesn't call a timeout,
Yep.
which I think says something about how, one, he just didn't want to turn the ball over and was worried about he knew his offensive line was struggling with Florida's defensive line at that point. And then the other thing is that I think he basically realized he was just going to have to hold on. Nothing's changed. They made some adjustments there in the third quarter and were much more effective from an offensive perspective. But the fact that Saban was sitting there going, nah, I'm going to be conservative. I'm going to let this run out. And Florida was happy to let it run out because it was 4th and 18, and Alabama was apparently happy to let it run out as well. I think says something about what Saban thought about Florida and thought about their chances. And certainly they proved that there in the second half, being able to come all the way back.
Now, because we'll dive into the defense in 4 bits, I'll take 2 bits to mention one other major difference in the game. We missed an extra point. And I'm going to, like Forrest Gump said, that's all I got to say about that. I'm just going to leave it there. I don't have – the guy just missed it. Well, he didn't slip. I didn't see any big deal. I went back and watched it like 10 times. We're all golf. If anyone's a golfer and you hit it off to the right, I guess that's about what happened there.
Yeah, it looked kind of like a shank. And you can't have it, right? I mean, same thing. I'd say the same thing about Weston not knowing the rule down on the kickoff. I mean, geez, just let the ball go. Right, you're in the end zone, let the ball go. It's a touchback, but to sit there and sort of like let it hit off your chest and then not chase after it, and not knowing that if the ball goes out at the 1, that's where you're going to have to sit. Again, Florida goes 99 yards, so it doesn't really make that big of a difference. But those sorts of things, right? Those little things, those start to add up and make a difference over time. And at the end of the day, you don't need much. I mean, it was the missed extra point. Is that little thing that then comes back and bites you. The misalignment, because Mullen won't say what actually happened on the 2-point conversion attempt, is one of those little things, right? And so it all sort of cascades where you have the missed extra point, so you're down by 2 at the end. You've got the ball that bounces off of Weston, so you've got 99 yards to go, which means that drive probably takes another minute and a half than it would have otherwise. And then that's
a very good point on the time. Even though they came through with the drive, the time ate up extra time. Yeah.
And then you've got the 2-point conversion, and you can even go further than that from an execution standpoint. So, the field goal, they had 2 explosive plays on that opening drive. They had a 20-yard run for Davis. They had a 21-yard pass to Gamble. You get 2 explosive plays on a drive, all 2 20-plus-yard plays on a drive. You almost always turn that into a touchdown. They had 2nd and 2 from like the 4-yard line, and somehow managed to end up with a field goal on third, can't convert 3rd and 6 and end up settling for a field goal. That is almost the game. At the time, I was sitting there texting you from the stadium saying, we need to go for this here. And when they sent out the field goal kicker, I'm like, no.
I was okay with that call, for the record. I think
and so was Gary Danielson. Well, so is Gary Danielson, which means you're wrong. But look, I get it. You take the points. It's early in the game, all that sort of stuff. But
4th and 3, I'm with you. 4th and 6, I thought we needed it early on. But
I mean, look, I you can argue about the positioning and you can argue about the points and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, field goals don't beat Alabama, and you lost by 2 at the end of the game. And it's not just that one thing. It's the little mistakes. Again, Dameon Pierce kicking that ball outside on 2nd and 2, right? If he'd have just buried his head and fallen down, it's 3rd and 3, not 3rd and 6. He tries to break it outside, gets tackled for a 3-yard loss. Now, I'm not blaming Pierce for that, but those are the types of things that seem to happen all the way throughout the game. And those are the things that if Florida can tighten up, then all of a sudden this game is, a 14-point win for Florida, because there were an awful lot of opportunities for Florida out there that didn't come to fruition because of, people are going to talk about the refs, and that's fine. But, if you're shooting yourself in the foot, it's really hard to blame the ref when he comes by and shoots you in the other foot. So,
saw Pierce make a great run to the outside a little later that put him in great position for 4th and short, where they end up putting it in the end zone too. I thought the running backs are great. We'll get to that too. On that 2-point conversion play, big mystery. Mullen won't say exactly. Misalignment, guys missed assignments. If you slow it down and pause it right when Emory Jones is starting to hand it off, we saw this delayed handoff. It wasn't the first time we saw it. This one looked a little muddled, but we saw Wright break a big run on it on the 90-yard drive. I believe that was the drive where he did that. We saw a couple other instances where that happened too, where that play went okay. It's just in that tight space though. it looked like Emery was almost thinking about pulling it for himself and following the block in between. But if he just gives it off to Davis right away, Davis got a good shot to get through that hole, I think. What do you think Jones was seeing on that play that he held back?
I'm not entirely sure. I think it's a little bit of a cop out to say it's a misalignment. Call timeout. You got two. There's 3:30 left. If you don't have I mean, that is the game, right? If maybe you lose a minute and you're sitting there saying that, oh, I can't afford to let go of the timeout. But that didn't stop anybody in the SEC championship game last year from calling timeouts and absolutely, because there was a lot less time after they made the touchdown pass down in the end zone last year in the SEC championship game, called timeout. That's the disappointing thing to me, is I think you got to call a timeout there if you're not in the right alignment. Now, if that's the play they meant to run and everybody was in the right place and all that sort of stuff, and it just doesn't work, hey, I can live with that. But to come out afterwards and go, yeah, we had it misaligned, somebody had a position, we didn't quite run what we wanted to run. Okay, like you should have spent all week practicing 2-point conversion attempts. What were you going to do in third and short, fourth and short, those sorts of things. But beyond what Jones saw, I think it looked like if Jones had pulled the ball, he would have had a touchdown too. It's just like the indecision was something that sort of slowed everything up.
He had two guys to the outside, and Sanders, the defensive end for Bama, was able to close in. And you see Sanders opens his arm. He's got such a wingspan. He almost was able to tackle both Jones and Davis while the ball was in the middle of this handoff.
I mean, look, man, I don't like that play. I mean, I like play calls where you try to stretch the defense when you get down there. You can't do that all the time, right? But I think back to the play that they ran back in 2018 against Michigan, where they threw the pitch to Jordan Scarlett to the outside, or was it to P. Ryan? It was one of those two. I think it was Scarlett to the outside in 2018 in the bowl game against Michigan, where they were down at the 1 yard line, had struggled really to bust the ball in from there, and then they threw sort of the pitch out to Scarlett, and it turned into a touchdown, an easy touchdown. Those sorts of misdirection things, that was kind of what I was expecting. The weird thing was the clock in the stadium was going haywire, so I actually almost missed the 2-point conversion play, because I'm sitting there going, why the hell's the clock still running? There was like a minute and 40 seconds left on the clock. Like originally it had 3:30 in it. So there was all sorts of weird stuff going on there. It was one of those. It was like the fog rolling in against LSU. It just felt weird.
Yeah, the mic stops working at one point. The clock had issues down the stretch. It was a really interesting finish to the game. All right, let's dive into 4 bits here, and really what we want to dissect. We gave our keys to the game last week in our preview. The first key, Will, was start fast. Woof, that one didn't happen. We also said explosive plays in the run game, make them earn it, bend but don't break on defense, and the magic number is 35 points for a Gators win. The start fast thing didn't quite happen. We like to spot Bama big leads. It's just more interesting that way, apparently. But if you want to go on the first 3 touchdown drives here with me, Will, the first touchdown play, you got trips out to the left. The running back goes in motion, and they really covered it pretty well on the inside. But Trevez Johnson seemed like he was late getting out into the flats on the outside. And he ends up being a little bit out of position toward the inside, misses the tackle on the running back, the swing pass against Alabama, the bane of our existence, apparently, and doesn't push him back inside, obviously, lets the guy around the edge, ends up McClellan takes it into the end zone for a pretty easy touchdown after all of the other receivers were pretty well covered on the play. What did you think about the swing passes early on? Because they were just killing us. Screens and swing passes.
Yeah, I mean, it looked as though the guys who were coming up to make the tackles didn't know where their help was coming from. Mm-hmm. So they weren't necessarily redirecting them back to the location they should have, right? I mean, if you know you don't have help back to the middle, you can't run past the tackle and let the guy cut back. If you know you have help in the middle, then you want to come in from the outside and make the guy cut back to the middle. That's actually, we'll talk about adjustments in a minute. That's actually one of the things that was an adjustment. But yeah, I mean, Trevez Johnson, especially in the first quarter, looked like he was out of position a few times. I think you say the same thing about Rashard Torrance. So the reality is that I think what it really happened is that they didn't expect Alabama to try to isolate the running backs the way they did last year in the SEC championship game. And Alabama came out and said, well, Florida couldn't guard it last year. Let's see what they do this year.
It looked very similar, didn't it?
Turns out Florida couldn't guard it, whether it was Najee Harris or anybody else in the last 2 years. And finally, Florida made some adjustments. But Florida came out. I had sort of said in my preview article, I hope they came out in a dime, and they came out in a nickel. So they came out with 3 down linemen and 3 linebackers, and the linebackers were lined up inside and couldn't get out and help. And that really sort of left the defensive backs out on an island. And, you're not going to double team the running back on a swing pass. You're just not going to. Now, Grantham, I think, and most people who are defensive coaches will say, well, I had my guy out there where he was supposed to be, and they didn't make the play.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely true. But then he shouldn't have made the adjustments in the second quarter that he did, because at some point they took that away. And when they took that away, then sort of forced Alabama to readjust to what was going on. So, I think the defense played pretty well. But, when you're down 21-3 and the first 3 drives, it just sort of feels like a buzzsaw is hitting you. Granted, there are a few penalties in there that helped, but it just felt like it felt like Florida couldn't stop them. It was really discouraging for everybody who was sitting around.
We can get to the compliments in a bit here, but let's take our medicine first and talk about the second touchdown here, where John Mechie basically just took out Trey Dean on a whoops route where he just ran straight into the safety, leaving Billingsley, the tight end, wide open on a wheel route for an easy 6 from Bryce Young.
Yeah, if you want to complain about penalties in this one, I think that's the one you probably want to complain about. I mean, it doesn't get really any clearer for offensive pass interference than that one. Mm-hmm. The official the guy's running with nobody around him. Now, granted, last year, maybe that would have just been Florida's screw up on defense. But this year, I think Billingsley had him beat anyway. I think they might have gotten it regardless, but just to have a Gator in the area might have made the play a lot more interesting. And
it was still kind of a tough catch. You had to kind of go over the shoulder with it in there. So, yeah, I mean, you would have liked to see D there, but the height advantage is definitely there. You're right about that.
Well, and again, I think if you wanted to complain, I know the play with Elam looked on the first drive or second drive, I guess that looked like pass interference to me in the stadium. It looked like he got yanked. I know in the replay he didn't, but it looked like pass interference. So I sit there and I go, okay, the official saw what I did, right? Which is that it looked like he modified his route. Now, the interesting thing is they went after Elam quite a bit, and those guys were really handsy the entire game. So for them to call the first one and then not call some of the other ones later, I think is sort of a, either call it or don't, but don't call it on 3rd and 7 one time and then not call it the rest of the game when it's like 1st and 10 and there's a ball thrown out there and they're all handsy. It's like, we'll just let that go. But to me, the most egregious one out of all of the ones was the Billingsley getting picked, or was Dean getting picked by Mechie. Man, we got to talk about Mechie. I don't know what he has out for Trey Dean, but we just need to put Dean on the other side or something whenever we play Alabama, so Mechie can stop going after him.
I know it ended up being a penalty, but Brenton Cox did something about that later in the game. I think so. Trey Dean, that was for you from Brenton Cox. Just thank him for that. The final touchdown to put them up 21-3. They started on the 38. Emory Jones gets hit as he's delivering the ball, causes it to sail. Armour Davis picks it up for the Tide, and they just march right down for an easy touchdown. And at that point in the game, you're really feeling like this is disaster mode. This is about as bad of a start as you could have hoped for. 21-3 in the first quarter, and really not significantly different from what we saw in Atlanta in terms of the defensive side of the ball. What did we see what adjustments did we see from Todd Grantham and that defense after that, Will?
I think one of the things he did, I'm going to point it out in an article I'm working on, but one of the things he did was he moved the linebackers. So he started out having 2 linebackers sort of behind the line of scrimmage, and he finally just said, I'm going to have to dare Alabama to run the ball. And I'm going to have to split out my linebacker to go help the guy on those flare routes to the running back and all those different things that Alabama was doing right at the line of scrimmage. You notice those went away in the second quarter and even in the third and the fourth quarter. Alabama made some adjustments to run some hitches over the middle and things like that wound up killing Florida there in the third quarter and the fourth quarter. But they took away just from their alignment, really, the ability to throw most of those types of screen passes out to the outside. And that, I think, was just based purely on alignment. What that allowed Florida to do was get the defensive back to feed, basically to get outside leverage, make the guy go back inside, and then you had 2 or 3 guys there ready to tackle because the linebacker was able to flow without getting caught up with an offensive lineman or somebody else engaged with him. So that, I think, was one of the key adjustments. The other is Mordecai McDaniel came in there, I think, in the 4th drive and seemed to make a difference at defensive back, seemed to have a little bit more speed, broke up some passes on the one where on the drive, when it was 21-0, they turned it over on 4th down, I think, and then they got the intentional grounding on the next on Bryce Young on the 1st down play.
Mm-hmm.
That was something. That drive, there were a couple of plays that were broken up. I think Trevez Johnson broke up one, but then Mordecai McDaniel broke up another one, and all of a sudden, Florida's defense had a little bit of momentum. And then the thing is, again, that intentional grounding was because Florida beat Alabama's offensive line up front with its front 4. And that was the other thing that really changed, is they just finally, once they took away the swing passes, there was enough time for the defensive line to get to the quarterback. And once there was enough time for the defensive line to get to the quarterback, Bryce Young all of a sudden looked like a freshman because he had to make reads and he had to figure out where the ball was going. It wasn't just, oh, that's open over there, I got one-on-one with my running back and a corner, or running back and a safety. It was, I can't go to that running back because Florida's taken that away. Now I have to go downfield. And when I have to go downfield, we saw it a few times. There was one where there was a slant he had that was pretty open, actually, but he threw it like 2 yards behind Mechie when Mechie was on Elam. Mm-hmm. That is the thing that I saw for Young on tape before the game, and I think everybody who plays Alabama will see from here on out, is that when he has to throw downfield, he's not the most accurate passer in the world. I think he throws it to the right place. I just don't think he always throws it accurately to that place. And Florida had a few times where they were able to take advantage. And like I said, their defensive line was able to start taking control of the game. And, you saw that in the rushing numbers, but I think you also saw that in how uncomfortable Young was.
Yeah, if I'm Bama, I would like to see more of a commitment to the run on the offensive side of the ball. Particularly Bryce Young himself has the ability to run, but we saw Jason McCullough. They have some good running backs back there. Brian Robinson, he had a nice day. He made plays when they needed him the most. But overall, I thought this defensive line, unlike Atlanta, where we were shredded across the board, really, but particularly like in the running game, I thought the defensive line held up strong against the running game. And in critical points, and back to where the crowd had an impact, and you're not just saying, wow, it was loud in there. Literally, there's points. Bama guys are tweeting all day on Sunday about how loud the environment was, and it was incredible. And you sit there and see the offensive line. I can't tell you how many times they're looking around at each other. There was one where Dexter got pressure up the middle because the guard was turning to the tackle to talk to the tackle. The ball was snapped as they were still communicating, and Dexter just blew right by. So the defensive line played well up the middle and on the ends. I felt like I saw a lot of tweets saying this too, and I agree with it. Cox might be one of his best games as a Gator so far.
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely drilled Young on one of them. I was actually surprised Young didn't cough the ball up. I think that's the quibble obviously is the first quarter, right? And then the other quibble is they didn't get any turnovers. And, they had some opportunities to get turnovers. I mean, you had the zone blitz where Cox drops back. It's a tough play, right? The ball's coming fast, but the whole point of having that zone blitz is that you're going to get that ball coming to you from the quarterback. Like, you're trying to bait him into that throw. They got it, right? They got exactly what they wanted. Alabama did exactly what they wanted them to do. And this is one of those things where when people criticize Grantham for various things, I think there are legitimate reasons to do it. But you can't criticize him on that one. He had everything going well. He got pressure with the zone blitz. He had Cox dropping back. Cox drops into the zone right where the ball's coming. The ball comes up, hits him right in the hands, and they don't get the interception. In fact, if he'd have caught that, he might have gone the other way for a touchdown. He's a fast guy, and he might have had the opportunity to get around the rest of the offense. He would have just had to beat offensive linemen basically heading in that direction. Mm-hmm. So that's just a huge play, right? And, the reality is that when the ball came off Emory Jones, it sailed a little bit. The cornerback made the play for Alabama, and all of a sudden it's 21-3. Florida has an opportunity to turn the ball over, to get the ball back to its offense that could not be stopped at that point by Alabama. The ball goes through Cox's hands. And, again, it's those little things, right? We've talked about it all night. The little things start to build up. It's not that it's not a difficult play for Cox. It's that Florida didn't make any of those plays throughout the game to sort of just completely change momentum. And that to me was the big opportunity. It was right there.
Well, they did change momentum on the very next play, but unfortunately, it was against themselves. And like Brenton Cox, that's a perfect example of how the game went. Cox makes the play, drops back, drops the interception. Would have been an incredible interception, by the way, but at the end of the day, doesn't make the play. And the next play gets flagged for pass interference because he just absolutely lays out John Mechie out of nowhere, which was a lot of fun to watch, even though it was a penalty. It was a fun. He just blew him up about 8 yards down the field, and then walks over to the ref and his, hey, what's the problem here, guy? Like, what did I do? Like, you're almost at the first down line, just blowing up a receiver. I thought that was kind of a funny interaction.
He should have earholed him. Apparently, that's a proper way to knock somebody down if you're from Alabama. But no, you make a great point. I think that was a killer, but it wasn't the only one. I mean, Alabama was 7 of 13 on third down, 1 of 1 on fourth down, so 8 of 14 overall on conversions.
But what I was going to ask though, Will, what about the penalties though? In key situations, it felt like those cropped up quite a bit. And maybe, like, I mean, especially third down, you talk about holding or pass interference or something like that. You saw, I used the Cox example too. What do we got to do to cut back in these key moments on these mistakes here?
Well, so one, it would be nice if the officials actually called stuff straight up. And I don't like using that as an excuse. But you and I both know there were a couple of pass interference calls that needed to be called or needed to not be called. They were close enough that I think they should have let them play. The other thing is that I think that if you're going to play press, and you're going to put Elam out on an island, then you're going to have to live with it. That's the reality. And so, the thing is, if the pass interferences had led to, like, let's say it's the last drive of the game and the pass interference takes Alabama from the 50 to the 35, and then they run the ball for like 3 yards and hit a 50-yard field goal to win the game. That's one where I go, okay, that pass interference call cost you the game. But every pass interference call, every holding, all that stuff, didn't cost Florida the game. They had opportunities to bow up. So even after the Cox pass interference penalty, they had an opportunity. I want to say it was like 3rd and 7. And they had an opportunity. It was actually, they threw it to the running back again out in the flat. And they had an opportunity to stop him. I think it was Robinson. They had an opportunity to stop him. And I think they replayed it and actually set it to 4th down. But it was like 4th down in inches. And then they ran it right in on the next play for the touchdown. They had an opportunity at 3rd and 7 to stop it at 4th and 4, and they just couldn't do it. And so that again, yeah, and that was the story of the game, right? The story of the game was, yes, there were some errors that the officials made that put Florida in some compromising situations. At the same time, at no point were they able to really step up and overcome any of those things. And the reality is, if you're going to beat Alabama, you're going to have to overcome some of those things, and just weren't able to do it.
And Will was referring to McClellan in the flat, made Johnson miss, cut inside, goes down. It was called a first down initially. They bring it back. Robinson just runs it in with ease from 4th and short. And that's how the whole game felt. It felt like, oh, we got a shot, and then you just can't close out when it mattered the most. At the end of the day, Will, we had our moments of frustration here. But where do you stand on Todd Grantham? I know it's impossible maybe at this point for Todd Grantham to win hearts and minds in Gainesville. But the adjustment, you can look at the start is terrible. The adjustments are great. And then in key moments, we gave it up when it mattered the most on 2 critical drives in the second half. So you got a real mixed bag, but it was competitive and the defense did keep you in the game to some extent.
Yeah.
I feel like if I have to explain it that long, I probably know the answer to the question, but
I think the answer is that the adjustments were pretty obvious before the game. Like, anybody who'd watched the Bryce Young tape from Alabama or from Miami knew what he was good at and knew what he wasn't good at. And yes, there were some penalties in there, but at the same time, there were a bunch of times where they brought blitzes. He identified the blitz and he found his guy right at the sticks, and they converted first down. And, I ran into a guy at the airport this morning who's like, it's so frustrating. I knew where the blitz was coming the entire time, the first quarter. And I'm like, yeah, so did Bryce Young. That was the problem. and so, it was, I think Todd Grantham is a okay defensive coordinator. I've thought that ever since he came. His track record is that he's not going to make you that much better. He's not going to make you that much worse. Same thing with recruiting. He's not going to make you that much better. He's not going to make you that much worse. And I don't know that against RPOs and read option type offenses. This is really read option. There are a lot of RPOs. And when you have a quarterback who has the freedom to make checks, you can't give away blitzes like they did. I mean, you could see the guys creeping up there in the first quarter. You knew who was coming. And, in fact, one of the things that sort of, like I said, that Cox play was something where it looked like you knew who was coming, and then they dropped somebody back and sort of confused them. I didn't see a lot of ingenuity at the safety position either. There wasn't a lot of stuff. And again, I'll have to go back and look at the tape in more detail, but I didn't see stuff where they were trying to confuse a young quarterback, where maybe you set up like it's going to be a cover two, but then you end up switching into a single high and he doesn't know, right? So he's going to throw into a window he shouldn't. They didn't make him take many shots downfield, which was a little bit surprising. I thought they would start to creep up and make him take more shots downfield, especially when it sort of got into the third and the fourth quarter and they were struggling to stop Alabama again. But again, one quarter does not, I mean, and Florida was outstanding in the second quarter on the defensive side of the ball, just outstanding. But one quarter doesn't make me impressed. And, you look at it and there were only 6 drives in the second half. And for ones that weren't Alabama. So Alabama was successful on all 3 of its drives, right? They scored a touchdown the first time. They scored a field goal the second time. And really the only reason they scored a field goal is it was 4th and goal from the 1. Mm-hmm. And, they, for some weird reason, they were trying to draw Florida offsides and false started. So they kick a field goal. So Florida obviously gets the stop down there in the red zone. They didn't stop Alabama. And then the third drive, they needed to get the ball turned over and use their timeouts and get the punt back. And they couldn't get the punt back till there was no time left. Right? I mean, Saban ran the ball knowing he was going to punt the ball with 10 seconds left. So 3 drives in the second half, all of them successful. 3 drives in the first quarter, actually more than that, but 3 drives to start the game, all of them successful. Everything in between was really good. But the problem is that, the front end and the back end of the game, Alabama was able to control Florida's defense and convert. And it felt a little bit better in the third and fourth quarter because they'd had that good second quarter. But, it was, I think if you look at a yardage basis, Florida comes out of this looking really good, right? Somebody tweeted at me today. If you just said that Grantham's defense was only going to go at 300 and something yards, you would have taken that in a million years. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But also gave up 31 points on 300 yards. So
3 straight 3 and outs was the first time since 2017 that's happened to an Alabama offense, I think. So they did have their moments, but like you said, it's a real mixed bag. There's both sides of the equation. If you don't like Grantham, you could probably point to some things. If you're not so much on the get him out of town right away train, then you can find some positives in there too. But like second half, when you needed it the most, just needed one stop. You couldn't really get it. You couldn't get it except when they were trying to run out of the clock. All right, Will, let's move on to 6 bits here. Really just wanted to point out a few people that impressed us. I'll start here, and our position groups too. Obviously, I'm going to take a big chunk here and just say both the offensive line and defensive line were great. And there's multiple players among each line that you could sit there and say had great performances. Like I saw Dexter in the mix plenty of times. Like we've talked about Cox. I thought even some of the linebackers coming off the edge. One guy that stood out to me too, in the linebacker, Jeremiah Moon. Some great pressure on Young at times yesterday, and the running game was just stuffed. The offensive line, they took care of business yesterday, running the ball too. So I was very happy to see that because you did not feel like that Florida really stood up in the trenches when they played Bama in December.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you run for you run for all the yardage that Florida did and sort of control the ball on the ground. 245 yards rush and 5.7 yards per rush. You're gonna say, hey, the offensive line did the job. And the interesting thing is 28 rushes for 91 yards for Alabama though again, 16 for 54 through three quarters. And that, the 37 yards on 12 carries in the fourth quarter sort of will put the game away. But still, I mean, yes, the defensive line is what made the game there in the second quarter, being able to take control, being able to make Bryce Young uncomfortable, and being able to sort of push Florida towards at least something that looked like they might be able to stop them, because I wasn't sure that it looked like the Tide might get to 100 there after the third touchdown there in the first quarter.
Another group of guys I circled: Davis, Wright, and Pierce. All offseason, we talked about Bowman and Lingard. We talked about the 5-star guys coming in. I think after this game, I know they look good in the first two games, but that was FAU and USF. Just Mullen's got the backfield under control. Davis runs so hard. That touchdown run he had where he's just dragging guys in the end zone. Pierce, we saw that great effort on the third down play to get it to 4th and short that set up another touchdown. We saw Pierce have a couple good runs on the day. Really, it was good effort up by him. That 99-yard drive was sparked by Naquan Wright, and we saw him have a couple big runs on top of that too. So really, this running back rotation, no questions about it going forward for me, Will.
No, I mean, I think Wright was really impressive, obviously, in that one game, in that one drive. He seems to be one of the guys who's really going to have to step up from catching the ball, especially if you're looking to get the ball out to the tight ends and the running backs quickly. Davis and Wright being able to do that is a big deal. I think the fact that you're saying that Davis, Pierce, and Wright all played well sort of points to what you said the first part of this, which is the offensive line played really well. And, we've been talking about all offseason that Gene DeLance and Stuart Reese are guys who are much more equipped for offenses are going to be run heavy. And I think the whole offensive line is proving that they're designed to be a much more run heavy offense. And I think we need to give credit to those guys, right? I mean, particularly there were multiple times where I thought DeLance did an awesome job with combo blocks, got to the linebacker, and then allowed Davis to be one-on-one with the safety. On the touchdown for Davis that went up the middle, and the one you referenced that he made a really nice, really strong finishing off that run. The center and the left guard did an awesome job of just clearing out the defensive tackle right in front, drove him 5 yards downfield. Again, there were multiple times where the running back didn't get touched until he got to the safety. And if you do that over and over again, you're going to get a bunch of explosive plays, because a running back with a head of steam is going to have the ability to put his foot in the ground and juke a safety. Safety might make the tackle maybe 3 out of 10 times. And, yesterday didn't make it that often. So that's why Davis was able to do that. And like you said, Pearson Wright, big plays as well.
Yeah, these guys are even when they're getting hit, the first guy is rarely bringing them down. You saw Garage, you mentioned a Garage on one of the option passes worked his way up pretty well to the safety too. So the effort on the offensive line is just fantastic. The last two I'll finish up with here: Emory Jones and Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen had the guts to stick with this guy. He's been telling us the whole time it's QB1. Emory Jones, Anthony Richardson, totally understand it. That the points on Richardson. I think Richardson's absolutely the higher ceiling guy. I think Richardson is a rare talent, and I can't wait to see him back on the field. I think it took big time guts for Dan Mullen to not push it with them. And this is a massive game. Could it have helped? Could Anthony Richardson have helped make a 2-point difference in that game? But it's like Mullen said after the game, look, it's a type of injury where if he plays, it could get worse. And to have the long-term outlook, we still control our destiny in the East with this, to have the patience to sit him out and say, you know what, he's going to be a backup. Even if he comes in the game, he's only going to be a guy that passes the ball. Really, he's not going to be anything else. So we didn't feel the need to play him today, but I thought Jones responded to that and elevated his game, even though we saw, I'll give a good example. Good example of Jones' play today is that 99-yard drive. First throw, not good. Second throw, low. Third throw hits Nick right on an open pass, big play down the field. We saw him miss shorter in the flats. There were different points of the game where Jones did not make impressive throws, or he didn't make the decision you wanted him to make. But overall, he pushed through, and I thought he ran the ball very aggressively, and he had a couple nice plays downfield too.
Yeah, so to your first point for Mullen, yeah, it takes some guts to hold the guy out. to hold Richardson out, but I think the jury's still out on that one, right? So if Richardson ends up being healthy for the Georgia game and is a big reason why Florida is able to beat Georgia, then I think you look back at this and say, yeah, that was a wise thing to do. If Richardson still has this nagging injury the whole year, then you're going to sort of say, well, what if? And if he comes out and, throws for 250 yards against Tennessee next week, it's going to be like, well, what the heck? We really could have used that. So the jury's sort of out on that one. I think the interesting thing, so yes, I think Emory Jones showed an awful lot of grit. I think he did a great job leading some of those drives there towards the end, but I think it's also a mixed bag. You mentioned sort of the 99-yard drive, but even the drive where he hits Whittemore on the 17 yards on 3rd and 19, it was 3rd and 19 because he lost the ball on an exchange on a read option play where he was trying to pull it back. And the mesh got screwed up. And so all of a sudden you've got a 2-yard loss. They have a false start penalty. Malik Davis runs for a loss of 2, and then they lose another 2 on the read option. And now you're sitting there 3rd and 19 where you have to make that throw. Now he made that throw, right? And I think that's one of the things that you look at and say, hey, when push comes to shove, he's willing to make it and he's willing to throw it, and he's gonna hit his guy. And that's a big time throw. But you're in that position because you put yourself in that position. And that was sort of the story. That was the story of yesterday, right? Is again, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it was 2 steps back, 1 step forward. Eventually everything has to get in lockstep, but it's 3rd game of the year. You're going to make some mistakes. Emory Jones was better yesterday than he was against USF. He was better against USF than he was against FAU. And that's all you can really ask, right? You can't kill the guy for going out there and playing within his limitations. But I do think that it is telling that once Florida finally switched from being equal, so they had 8 rush attempts in the first quarter, 7 pass attempts. Then they had 13 rush attempts in the second quarter, 9 pass attempts. That's when they score the 1 touchdown. But then when they started throwing the ball on the drive where they got to midfield, the drive fizzles out. In the third quarter, 14 rush attempts, 7 pass attempts. And in the fourth quarter, 8 rush attempts and 5 pass attempts. But in most cases, that's because the clock was running down and they needed to make those conversions. So they were much more run heavy in the third quarter and the fourth quarter. They were much more run heavy on the big drives in the second quarter that got them back into the game. That's the reality, right? Now, Emory Jones is a big part of that, right? He's a big part of them being run heavy. And so he's a big part of that entire thing. But I think if you wanted to point to one thing from a coaching perspective that I would quibble with when it comes to the game plan coming in for Florida, it's that 8 rush attempts and 7 pass attempts there in that first quarter. That sort of set the stage for the ball to get turned over pretty quickly and for Florida not to be able to establish the big advantage that they had. And that advantage does include Emory Jones, but at the same time, passing the ball all the time sort of puts him in a position where you're not asking him to do the thing that he does the best.
And I think that the end statement there is key about Emory Jones. He has his limitations, but the things he does well, he does really well. He can do really well. And so you have to put him in those situations for him to succeed. I don't want to see a lot of 3rd and 19s with Emory Jones, the quarterback. I don't. But I think they're, like you said, self-inflicted on some extent, and we are seeing that. And part of it too is we're just living a culture too where we just expect these guys to step in and just rip it up and be Heisman candidates right away. And part of it too is because we're seeing Emory Jones or Anthony Richardson almost do that in the limited time we've seen him. I'm not here to debate Jones versus Richardson. I think there's a clear answer there. But in the position we were in yesterday with what we had to do, and that game was going to be heavily on Emory Jones' shoulders, I thought he played admirably at times, and he definitely kept the Gators in that game. And I hope he continues to improve as the season goes along, because even though we're all going to sit here and talk about it as a Jones versus Richardson QB1 discussion, I don't think Dan Mullen's having that discussion in his head from what I've seen so far. And I think we're going to see a lot of Emory Jones to come for the rest of 2021, Will.
I think you're right. I think that I'm not sure that I agree with that assessment, but they don't pay me the big bucks to make that decision. And we will, when the dust settles in December, we'll all be able to take a look back and see how that quarterback battle and the team battle actually for all those different things played out. At the end of the day, this Alabama game is, and we're going to get to this in a second, this Alabama game is important because of what it says about the team, but it's not important when it comes to the goals. I mean, they can still accomplish every goal they want to accomplish. And a big, Anthony Richardson is going to be a big part of that, but so is Emory Jones. And multiple times we've talked about how both guys were going to be needed, if for no other reason, because they're going to get injured over the course of the season because they're being asked to run so much. And, it might be 3 weeks from now, Emory Jones gets dinged in the game and we need Anthony Richardson to be healthy. And so holding him out in this game maybe allows him to be healthy when something like that happens. And you hope nothing happens to Emory Jones, but he ran the ball 19 times yesterday, and you run the ball 19 times a game against teams like Alabama, and the risk of injury and the risk of being out of the game, at least for just being dinged up, a shoulder or an ankle or something like that, goes way up. So yeah, obviously you're going to need both guys, and you have to have both guys ready.
One thing I do think Mullen needs to do is put his arm around Anthony Richardson's shoulder and say, hey, listen, dude, if I'm going to sit you on a sideline, could you not do backflips in front of 90,000 for me?
Yeah, he did get it. He got everybody.
It's really getting people on my case here. Can you lay off of the backflips here?
It's funny. All the intel before the game was that he was going to be really limited. Like that was all the intel before the game. And then you go in and you see him do a backflip, and you see him during warmups. And it is interesting. Like, he and Emory Jones have very different mechanics. So when they were you could really see it live. When you see it, Emory Jones is very much, he uses his trunk of his body to twist and generate the velocity on the throw. And I think that makes him a little bit less accurate left to right. Anthony Richardson already has his hips open when he throws the ball, and it's just sort of like this flick of his wrist, and it's completely effortless. And
because he's a monster.
Yeah, pretty much. It's ridiculous. I mean, the guy's out there with like half a hamstring apparently, and doing backflips and just throwing the ball effortlessly. So look, we got a good future with Anthony Richardson, but I think we got a good future with Emory Jones. And the reality is that I think there's some questions about Alabama. I think there's some questions about Florida, but I think those questions started to get answered there on Saturday. Obviously, you would have liked them to have been answered with, say a 32-31 victory for Florida, but there's no reason to be down on the program or down on the players after a performance like that. I think to battle back and all that sort of stuff says something about the guys on the team.
Look, there's no one who's more pro backflip than me. If you could do a backflip, I'm all about it. Go ahead, let's see it. But Anthony Richardson, stop doing that in pregame, man. We need you, dude. Stop doing that. If he gets a knee injury or something from doing a backflip or front flip or whatever flip, you gotta stop that, man.
Can you imagine it? Can you imagine if he had been ready to play and then he tweaked his hamstring on the backflip?
That needs to stop. Like, it's really cool to watch. We're all about it, but we got it on video now. We'll play it. Just get Dan Mullen to talk to somebody to put that thing on the Jumbotron so you could show us your backflip before every game. It's on video already, though. We don't need to see it live anymore. It's good. It's just too nerve-wracking.
You're just no fun, Nick. No fun at all.
No, I can't do that. No more backflips, dude. No more backflips. Last question on this before we move to $1. What if Anthony Richardson did play? What if he was healthy? Because somebody's asking that out there.
Everybody's asking it out there. I mean, if he's healthy, I don't know. I mean, I think that. Well, actually, I do know. I think Florida wins. I think he comes in that third drive, and the dynamic is different. You can feel it. So Florida, it's interesting. The last 3 drives for the Gators were, I want to say, so the drives in the second half: 440, 404, 615, and the one play at the end of the game. They only had 6 explosives the entire game, but they had 2 explosives on the opening drive. That ends up in a field goal. They had the explosive to Wells that puts the ball, the explosive to Wells that puts the ball at midfield, and then they punt off of that. And then from there, they only had 1 explosive, the 30-yard rush for right on the 99-yard drive. They didn't have any explosives that actually put them in the end zone. And that, to me, is the difference between the two quarterbacks, is that the explosives for Emory Jones are, something where it's a dump off to gamble where it's wide open. It turns out into 21, 22, 23 yards, but it's not a score. And Anthony Richardson, every time he seems to touch the ball, it turns into a score. And so if they had 2 of those yesterday, this game is way closer to start with. And it's not a race to get back into it. It's can we hold on? Are we going to get too conservative? And is Alabama going to have to open things up against a defense that the defensive line was taking control of Alabama's offensive line? Would have been a very different game, especially with as loud as the stadium was. But, hey, can't do anything about it, right? I mean, he wasn't out there, wasn't playing. And had he been playing with a bum hamstring, I think the explosives might have looked very, very different, right? He's going to go down 20 yards out. He's not going to be able to take it 80 yards for a touchdown. And so Anthony Richardson wasn't healthy. He didn't play. And, at the end of the day, woulda, coulda, shoulda. We'll see in December, hopefully.
think Dan Mullen did the right thing. I think he did the right thing. Hopefully we'll see in December, like you said. Let's go to $1 and look ahead to the rest of 2021. But before we do, what thoughts on the first quarter of the season overall? They always break the football coaches, they break their schedules into quarters. 3 games in to a 12-game season. Will, what's your thought on the first quarter?
I think we're right where we thought we'd be. I think most people coming into the year kind of penciled in Alabama as a loss. I think maybe less encouraged from the first 2 games, more encouraged from the third. I think the Anthony Richardson saga, as it might be termed, has been something that gives us hope. Right. I mean, I think we all know that we're going to need quarterback play at an elite level to compete with the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world. And Emory Jones thus far has been solid, but has not been spectacular. And Anthony Richardson has been nothing short of spectacular. In fact, he's far exceeded, I think, any expectations anybody could have had about him, in the first couple of games. So when you factor all that in, you've got this is the reason people love recruiting, is recruiting is all about hope and all about how good your program can be. That's the reason everybody loves Anthony Richardson, because his skill set and his ceiling is about hope and how good the program can be. So if you ask me, what kind of questions have we answered in the first 3 games? I think we've gotten quite a few answers, right? I mean, we've got answers that the defensive backs are still going to struggle. I think we've got answers that the defensive line is way stronger than last year. I think we got some answers about the linebackers and their ability to at least hold up, especially with Jeremiah Moon switching to the center. I think we definitely got some answers about the offensive line and their ability to move things, especially against Alabama. I think we got those answers, that in SEC play, the offensive line is going to be able to perform. I think we've gotten some answers about the running backs. I think we've gotten the answers on the quarterbacks. I'm not sure that we necessarily like all the answers that we've gotten at the quarterback position, but we've gotten the answers there too. So, I think a B. I mean, it's not an A if you're not 3-0 after 3 games. They had an opportunity to earn an A yesterday and they weren't able to do it. But I think we've they are who we expected them to be, maybe a little bit better than we expected them to be. And that's exciting leading into the last 3 quarters of the year, because they're going to have an opportunity to really do something special if they can build on this.
For a team that had so many position groups that you had hope for in terms of their potential, but you weren't totally sure about, like even someone like Brenton Cox yesterday, we haven't seen him play that good as a Gator. We haven't seen that yet. We've seen him have some moments here and there, but that was a complete game yesterday. We saw out of him. And the defensive line in general, Dexter's looked good. I mean, a lot of these guys have really a lot of the concerns of whether or not this group could go this way or that way. A lot of the news has been positive so far early in the season. And I think that's very encouraging, especially considering the amount of turnover. There's not a lot of programs that could turn over a guy who finished in the voting for the Heisman Trophy and just go right back at it and lead the nation. We led the nation in passing last year. We're going to be among the national leaders in rushing this year. It's just they're doing it a different way. And I think that speaks to what Dan Mullen is building here at Florida. I know people have their gripes about where we're at in terms of recruiting and some of the other things, but it's been impressive so far. Good battle against Alabama yesterday. Obviously frustrated about the start of the game, and there's different moments yesterday I'm frustrated about, but we were in it, having a chance to at least go down to the wire and push a team that's in the playoffs year in and year out. That means we are close to that level, if not almost there. I would love another shot at them in Atlanta, but in order to do that, you got to get through the rest of the schedule. So the upcoming schedule here, Will, the Vols coming to Gainesville next week. Certainly a team that didn't have a lot of expectations coming into the season with Heupel as coach. A lot of guys leaving the program. I think Tennessee, we've seen a little more offense out of them so far this season, but the competition hasn't really been there. They lost to Pitt in their second game, and they bounced back nicely, but they played Tennessee Tech last week, this Saturday. Okay. Kentucky, they look like they got some quarterback play up there. That could be, hopefully we show up for a full game against Kentucky, because we know how that could go when we don't. Vanderbilt is the homecoming game, and then you go on the road to LSU, which the UCLA game wasn't a great look at LSU so far. UCLA ends up dropping Saturday night to Fresno State, by the way. And the big test in Jacksonville, you get a week off, and then you get Georgia. And I'm gonna hate to say this, but I gotta say, after watching Bama for the first 3 games and Georgia for the first 3 games, Is Georgia better than Alabama this year? I don't like saying it. It hurts coming out. Got to ask it though.
Nobody knows, right? Because Clemson didn't look all that great against Georgia.
Just your opinion. Your opinion.
My opinion, yeah, I think Georgia's probably a better team. I think, and to be honest, that all comes back to Bryce Young. I mean, I think we saw some of his strengths yesterday. I think we saw some of his warts yesterday. And the question will be, can JT Daniels stay healthy? And that, I think, unfortunately, I think that's actually going to be probably the story is Daniels is a statue back there. He gets sacked a lot. And he's already missed one game because he, strained an oblique. And you've got Kirby sort of splitting time with him and Stetson Bennett for some reason unbeknown to every member of humanity. And you were texting me yesterday while I was in the car on the way home from the game, telling me that Bennett led 2 touchdown drives, and then that Daniels led 2 touchdown drives, and all of a sudden Bennett's coming in. I'm like, well, if he wasn't playing South Carolina, just blowing him out of the water, we'd be talking about Kirby for his own Kirby on this one.
Well, Bennett came in and threw an interception on his first pass after Daniels led 2 touchdown drives, 10 plays, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. Let's put it in Bennett. Throws a touchdown, throws an interception. South Carolina gets a field goal off of it.
So, I mean, look, I think Georgia's good. I think Georgia's a good team. I think we're not going to know because we don't know. So I think we all assumed that Uiagalelei there at Clemson was going to be outstanding, but now Clemson is struggling offensively. So you look at Georgia. Now, I will say that when it comes to some of the underlying statistics I look at, Alabama was kind of towards the bottom end of the SEC after 2 weeks, and Georgia was up right at the top. And so I do think that their defense is legitimate. Now, the question is Florida's offensive line looks to be legitimate too. And that's one of the things is it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens when those two get together, because you're going to have this defense that is really nasty, and you're going to have an offensive line that's also pretty nasty. And if you get those two things combined, I think that is a way to beat Georgia. I'm not sure you're going to have a pretty passing game against the Bulldogs. I think you're going to have to get down and dirty and knock them backwards. And I think if you knock them backwards, I think you'll really have an opportunity. And, I said this in the Alabama game. I didn't expect Florida to be intimidated, and all of a sudden it was 21-3. So I hesitate to say that about the Georgia game now where, Florida beat them last year, so they won't be intimidated.
How did we start that game last year, Will?
14-0, man.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, 2 Heisman Trophy candidates help out an awful lot. They don't have those guys this year, so we'll see. But I think next week's game is going to tell us a lot. Because I think Kentucky, especially if you look at the stats from the Chattanooga game, I didn't get a chance to actually watch it, but it was close, and they gave up 171 yards rushing on 28 carries to Chattanooga, and only rushed for 102 yards themselves. Rodriguez 13 carries for 46 yards. Will Levis 35 attempts for 254 yards, so not very efficient. He'd been really good in the first 2 weeks of the year, but obviously Kentucky hadn't necessarily played anybody all that great. But you got Tennessee coming up next week. You're licking your wounds from the Alabama game. Do you come out juiced because you're a great team? Or do you come out feeling like because you're a great team, you can go through the motions? And if they come out feeling like they're a great team, they can go through the motions, then I think, Tennessee, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and LSU, there's an opportunity to get clipped before you go to that Georgia game. If you come out saying, we know we're a good team, but we got to fix all these little things that we made, that were problematic in the Alabama game. And if we do, then we'll be ready for at LSU, and we'll be ready for Georgia. And if that's the attitude that they take, then I think that this team has an opportunity to be pretty special, especially when Richardson comes back. So, I mean, if you ask me to pinpoint a game, it's next week. I think you tune in to see that Tennessee game at night in the Swamp. The stadium, I think, is going to be rocking again because everybody understands that this is an opportunity for this team to be special. If they come out and win that game by a touchdown and they don't really run the ball that well, and the defense has a couple blown coverages and all sorts of stuff, I'm going to get really concerned. If they come out and it's, they run for 350 yards and the Vols can't stop them, and Emory Jones is out there, converting third downs left and right, and the defense is getting pressure with the front four, then you say, okay, the Vols aren't great, but if they're fixing the things that they need to fix, that they see on film that they did wrong in the Alabama game, and they're not willing to rest on their laurels of, hey, we hung with Alabama, because the reality is they have to get better to beat Alabama. And the Swamp, for all of its the Swamp's a great place to play, but it did give them an advantage yesterday. And so you go play them in Atlanta, you're not going to have that advantage. You have to get better. And so let's see next week when they come out against Tennessee, have they embraced that message? Have they embraced they need to get better? And can they just put a whipping on the Vols? Because that'd be awesome.
So after the Georgia game, you got out South Carolina versus Samford, at Missouri versus Kentucky. Outside of the Georgia game, Will.
Florida State, not Kentucky.
I'm sorry, Florida State. Florida State. I was jumping there in my thought here. Outside of the Georgia game, Florida State might as well be Kentucky right now.
Jacksonville State. We could just sub in Jacksonville State.
0-3, and they're calling for Norvell to be fired already. Are you kidding me, dude? I saw my first Deion Sanders article. My first Deion Sanders is going to be the next Florida State coach article already.
So when Taggart was let go, I wrote an article about how I should be the next Florida State head coach. because I couldn't possibly run the program into the ground any worse than it already was. Apparently I was wrong. I also told them they could just pay me per win, because I'd win the 2 games against Cupcakes, like pay me $100,000 to win. I'd win the 2 games against Cupcakes or the 3 games against Cupcakes, be happy with my $300,000, and then just lose the rest of them and end up with the same record as everybody else. Turns out Norvell had me beat. Like, he's losing the Cupcake games, and so they should reconsider. Bring Will Miles in to be the head coach.
It's going to be a long season in Tallahassee. Not concerned about that one in the Swamp. So basically, you look at the schedule here, looking ahead. At LSU, at Kentucky, at Missouri are your SEC games on the road that you might circle as maybe a bit of concern. Kentucky, though, as in we should win, but for whatever reason, there's like a rule in the universe that we just don't ever play awesome against Kentucky. The LSU game on the road, I'm supposed to be more nervous about that than I am, though. They went into UCLA. They gave up over 200 yards on the ground. Now, granted, it was on 47 yards, 47 attempts, so it was a 4.5 per rush average on that. But shouldn't I have learned my lesson last year from not looking ahead on LSU? I should be more concerned about that game, right?
You really should. LSU is always weird. It's just always weird. It's going to be in Baton Rouge, so it's also going to be loud, and it's going to be one of those things where, at Kentucky you'll be kind of loud, but at LSU, and granted, Emory Jones has experienced that road game at LSU, but that's one thing we haven't seen Anthony Richardson experience yet. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens to him when he goes out there and can't hear himself think, and sort of experiences the environment from the other side that they just sort of put on Alabama yesterday. But look, if you're going to be special, you go out to Baton Rouge and you take care of business, and you do it by 2 touchdowns. They gave up like 16 or 17 yards per attempt to UCLA. I think UCLA only like 16 attempts. So they threw for like 250 yards. Yeah, passing. Yeah. And so, you talk about the 47 rushes for 200 and something yards, but that's set up through the air and the big plays and the explosive plays and that sort of stuff. And so that's what I expect from Florida. I think Florida is a better team than UCLA. I think, now granted, LSU had some weird stuff going on with the hurricane and all sorts of other stuff as well. But here's the reality is that Orgeron seems to have quite a bit of heat underneath him. And, the Joe Brady talk, I'm sure, is starting to get a little bit louder. And just in terms of, was he the reason for the national championship a couple years ago? And, so you got to take care of business. Now, the good news is I don't think Florida's going to overlook LSU because of what happened last year, right? Those guys remember that game. And I think they'll be ready to come out and play and hopefully can, again, I think if Florida is a legitimate playoff contender, they will beat LSU by more than 2 touchdowns. It's reality.
Agreed. And that's what I think. I'm looking at the schedule here, and Georgia is the game. Georgia's the game. You circle. I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, but you get by this Bulldogs team, you got a great shot to see Alabama in Atlanta again. And if we get another shot at Bama, Will, I went through it. I looked at it because I was curious. Because, like you said, 2 games in a row, 18 point. We spot them 18, right? So if we get another shot at Bama, they've only lost 15 games since the Saban dynasty started in 2009. And honestly, off the top of my head, if you would have asked me, has Bama not been undefeated since 2009? I had no idea that 2020 was the first year since 2009 that they had gone unbeaten. You think about all those great teams that have won national titles. They have a loss along the way typically. But like I said, 15 games total since 2009. Only 3 of those teams that beat Alabama managed to come back from 2 scores or more to beat the Tide under Nick Saban. That's 2010 Auburn with Cam Newton all-time player. They come back from 24-0 and they end up winning 28-27. 2014 Ohio State in the first round of the playoffs. The Buckeyes were down 21-6 in the first half, end up winning 42-35. And the national championship game with Clemson, where Clemson with Deshaun Watson had the final drive that beat them. Clemson was down 14-0 in that game. So it's pretty rare to beat Alabama. It's even more rare to beat them after spotting them 2 scores. So that's 3 losses there for Bama after being up by 2 scores by a combined total of 12 points. So even if you somehow manage to come back, you're going to have to sweat to barely pull it off. And like I said, two meetings in a row down 18 points. Let's fix that, man. We got to fix that if we're lucky enough to get to Atlanta to face them again.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You mentioned sort of the list of things that we put as a key to the game. One of them was a fast start, and the other one was 35 points. And turns out we scored 29 and we let them get off to a fast start. And that's the difference in the game, right? You knew that the defense was going to struggle at certain points along the game. You didn't expect them to struggle the way they did the first 3 drives. And I think it sort of colored things. It was interesting. The game didn't seem as tense to me as a normal 2-point game, just because it didn't get intense until like the opening drive of the third quarter. And when Florida came down to pull it within 1 score, you're like, oh, okay. But sort of heading into halftime, you're still sort of like, we wasted an opportunity there with 3 or 4 minutes left. We had it at midfield, like haven't been able to move the ball consistently. We only have the one big, the 1 touchdown drive. Even on that one, missed the extra point. So like everything sort of had a but associated with it. They're gonna have to eliminate that, right? And it's interesting. I think a lot of people are going to look at this game and say, hey, the expectations have been raised because of the way you played against Alabama. I think in some ways that's true. I think the other thing, though, is that my expectations are more, it's more of a process really than it is a result. I want to see things get cleaned up as opposed to seeing some sort of schematic advantage that gets drawn up or something like that. It's like, just clean up the mistakes you're making. You just got a front row seat to the best team in the country and making a bunch of mistakes and having an opportunity to compete with them. But the reality is there are also a bunch of things that had to go their way. I mean, they needed a 4th down conversion on the pass interference to Copeland. They needed a couple other 4th down conversions to make this work. Sure, there were things that went against them as well, but for all the mistakes that were made along the way, there were a bunch of things that went Florida's way too to allow them to make the comeback. You don't need to jump out to an 18-point lead, but you can't let Alabama jump out to an 18-point lead. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to have to fix that. Find a way to fix it. Find a way to know what the opposition is going to do early on, and be able to make adjustments before you're down by 3 scores.
Well, it was a fun week. A lot of build up for this one. I thought entertainment value certainly lived up to the hype. And it's just great to see college football back in a normal state after a really weird year in 2020. Will, we're going to do a bonus episode for our Patreon subscribers. We want to know if the Bama performance elevates our expectation this year, and are the Gators getting closer to meeting that Gator standard that we hear about a lot from Dan Mullen. Florida ends up falling to Alabama 31-29, but the season starts now. The SEC East is firmly within their control, and they got it. They got it from here on out. Anything they want to do is up to them from here on out, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, everything's still in front of you. You have the opportunity. You say this every year after the first loss, especially when it's to an impressive team. And based on what Alabama does the rest of the year, this is going to be a really impressive, I hate to say this, but an impressive loss to the college football playoff committee, right? Like Florida gained a lot of respect yesterday, even if they didn't get the win. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't matter if you've got 3 losses at the end of the year. That only matters if you got 1 loss and you're competing with or maybe if you lose again in the SEC championship game and you're competing with another team to decide, are you going to get into the playoff or not? And so, the reality is that the margin for error has been completely reduced. You can't lose again. And, you did that to yourself. You had an opportunity to take advantage of some of those things. Alabama was there and a little bit exposed there in the second half. And had they been able to expose it a little bit earlier, it'd be a very different story, but they weren't. And so you move forward and say, hey, Congratulations to Alabama for winning the game. It sucks, but at the end of the day, we learned something about our team. Hopefully, the team learned something about themselves, and we'll see that improve as we go throughout the year.
We'll be back next week after the Gators write their next chapter against the Tennessee Volunteers in the Swamp. Will, fun episode, man. Like talking about the disappointing result, but I think this team's got a lot to look forward to coming up.
Yeah, man. I look forward to it too. Thanks to everybody for coming up, talking to me. It's one of the first times I've ever come to the Swamp and actually got recognized for stuff other than hanging out next to Gator Dave. So, it's fun. I appreciate everybody watching this new venture that you and I've put on for this year and commenting on it and talking about how you enjoy it. So certainly appreciate all the support, appreciate all the YouTube views, and appreciate all the Patreon subscribers. Head over there for a couple of bucks a month. You can check out all these extra episodes we put up there, and appreciate all your support.
Go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.